Joining me again, Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano, also Secretary of the Interior Ken Salazar, and in New Orleans, Coast Guard Commandant Admiral Thad Allen, who yesterday was designated the National Incident Commander. Admiral Allen, I want to start with you. The Coast Guard early on was on the scene, but some have criticized the Coast Guard for relying too closely on information being provided by BP. In retrospect, was that a mistake?
I can assure you, because I was involved in this event from the start, the Coast Guard's been fully involved. I think everybody needs to understand this started off as a catastrophic search and rescue operation following the explosion. The offshore oil vessels that were standing by saved over 90 people. We medevac 3 people who were critically injured to hospitals, probably saved their lives, moved a salvage and response team in immediately, consulted with the Navy supervisor of salvage. As the rig burned and then ultimately sunk, we were dealing with 5,000 feet of riser pipe that was crumpled on the sea floor and the need to do surveillance with an ROV. This event kind of revealed itself over time, and at each step as we understood what was going on, we made that public. The difference between a 1,000 barrel a day discharge and a 5,000 barrel a day discharge is not uncommon with the accuracy that's available when using remotely operated vehicles at the bottom of the ocean. But I'm completely satisfied with the Coast Guard's role in this.
But did you rely too much on information from BP?
Well, you rely on information from everybody. The only information we have from the bottom is from remotely operated vehicles, and of course that comes from industry. But we're also using overhead imagery, working with the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, NASA. The week of the event, I actually had breakfast with the head of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency that brought me imagery in. So everybody was in the fight.
Secretary Salazar, turning to you, are you confident that BP can stop this leak?
I'm confident that the leak can be stopped. The only question is when it will be stopped. If the ultimate relief here is drilling the relief well, it could be something that would be out 90 days. Hopefully there'll be other measures that will stop it before that time. But what I am confident of this is that both BP and all the global resources are being spent trying to figure out a way of stopping the leak at the source.
But you didn't answer whether or not you think BP can stop it. Do you think BP can stop it?
Do I think BP will stop it because it'll have to be stopped through a relief well ultimately, but the hope is, and this thing has been going on 24/7 nonstop, making sure that other procedures are going in the interim that hopefully will stop it before this continues to grow. They've been working throughout the night. They've been working really from day one to try to figure out a way of stopping it, and hopefully something will happen. Best case scenario, it gets stopped today. Worst case scenario, this thing could keep going on for 90 days.
Madam Secretary, the new leak was discovered on April 24th, but the controlled burn of the oil did not start until 4 days later. I've heard some experts say that the controlled burn should have started immediately after the new leak was found on April 24th. Was that a mistake in retrospect?
Well, I'll let Thad Allen talk to some of the timing of that, but part of this has been the weather has not been our friend on this, and the weather conditions have impeded in situ burning, which is what you're talking about on the surface of the ocean, also skimming and some of the other operations that could be underway. So Mother Nature has not exactly been friendly. I'll let the Commandant address the actual technique of how you do an in situ burn. Commandant?
Yes, ma'am. An in situ burn is accomplished by collecting oil that's on the water with a series of fireproof berms, fireproof barriers, and then actually igniting it on fire. There are a series of protocols that have to be met before we can do this, and these are pre-negotiated ahead of time, are in place for any spill that would happen in the Gulf. The most significant factor here is the direction of the wind, so that any air quality issues that might arise from the in situ burn wouldn't impact land. And we were waiting for the right window of opportunity when the wind was actually out of the west so we could conduct the burn. And as soon as we had the conditions to do it, we did it.
Secretary Salazar, I want to play for you some sound from President Obama a month ago talking about offshore oil drilling, if we could roll that sound.
It turns out, by the way, that oil rigs today generally don't cause spills. They are technologically very advanced. Even during Katrina, the spills didn't come from the oil rigs. They came from the refineries on shore.
Does the President still have confidence like that?
There are 30,000 wells that have been drilled out in the Gulf of Mexico, and so this is a very, very rare event. And we have to remember, Jake, that the fact that 30% of the oil that we produce domestically comes from the Gulf of Mexico. And so for us to turn off those spigots would have a very, very huge impact on America's economy right now when the President is doing everything to stand up this economy. So this is an industry that can operate safely. There has been a tragic accident here, and we need to learn the lessons from it. And we will not move forward with any kind of activity on offshore oil and gas drilling that isn't going to have safety first. But we have to do an investigation and get to the bottom of what happened here.
Secretary Napolitano, you keep talking about preparing and planning for a worst-case scenario. Tell us, what does a worst-case scenario look like? How much oil are we talking about? How much devastation to the Gulf or even to the East Coast?
I think what we're talking about is a slick that hits vital wetlands, marshlands, and all the rest that we have not been able to stop either from coming up from the seafloor or on the sea surface itself. Right now, that could be in the tens of thousands of gallons per day, of barrels per day. That's why there were, from day one, we were pre-positioning more than 70 vessels. That's why almost 1 million feet of boom have been pre-positioned and are being deployed now. That's why we stood up joint command centers that involved not just the Coast Guard, but also the environmental agencies and also the states that were involved, so that everybody could operate in a coordinated fashion as the situation changed over the course of the week.
We only have a couple minutes left. I want to turn to a couple other issues. Secretary Napolitano, as the immediate past governor of Arizona, do you think the new immigration law in that state is constitutional, and do you think it invites racial profiling?
Well, I think the Justice Department is looking at the constitutionality of the law, and I see.
You're a former U.S. attorney?
I'm a former U.S. attorney and Attorney General, by the way.
And a prospective Supreme Court nominee. You certainly have an opinion about whether or not this law is constitutional.
Well, I will say they've already amended the law over the course of the weekend, so even the Arizona legislature is starting to recognize there were problems with the law. Unfortunately, I think it does and can invite racial profiling. I think it's bad for law enforcement. I think it illustrates the need, as the President has said, for a bipartisan approach to comprehensive immigration reform in this town. It's really a cry of frustration from Arizona. I will say that more assets have been put into Arizona in the last 15 months than ever in history. And actually, the numbers, if you step back and look at it, the numbers actually are down in terms of apprehensions, which indicates fewer illegal crossings, but also up in terms of actual enforcement action. So the numbers actually are counter to what the action of the legislature is. But you know what? There's still a frustration out there. It's a frustration ultimately that will only be solved with comprehensive immigration reform.
We only have a minute left. Secretary Salazar, your family has been in this country since the 1500s, from Spain originally, I believe. Do you worry that as a Hispanic American, that if you went to Arizona, you might be racially profiled because of this law?
You know, Jake, I think the fact of the matter is that there's a clarion call here for comprehensive immigration reform. And when you don't have a comprehensive immigration program in place, what ends up happening is that you do have laws that come up that end up creating the kinds of injuries that are being talked about here, where there is racial profiling, which is a real potential. And so I think where the President has been on this, and where a number of the members of Congress, including Senator Reid, have been, that we need to move forward with comprehensive immigration reform is exactly right.
One last question. You think she'd be a good Supreme Court justice?
Yes.
She would.